There are moments in life that feel like coming home. They don't always happen at a place you own, or even a place you've been to in years. Sometimes home is a feeling. It's the easy camaraderie of old friends, a shared story that makes the whole room erupt in laughter, a warm handshake with a face you haven't seen in 3 decades but would recognize anywhere. These moments are precious because they are a bridge. They connect the person you are today with the person you once were, reminding you of an identity forged in a time and place that nothing can ever erase. This is a story about one of those perfect homecomings. It's the story of a man named Dave Creighton. Now, that name might not ring a bell alongside the giants of hockey history. He never won the Hart Trophy as the league's most valuable player, and his name isn't engraved on the Stanley Cup. But Dave Creighton was a member of one of the most exclusive, demanding, and legendary fraternities in the history of sports, the original Six National Hockey League. And for one perfect sun-drenched summer day, he came home to the team that started it all for him, the Boston Bruins. He spent that day surrounded by his brothers, not brothers of blood, but of the bond, a bond sealed by shared sweat, long train rides, and fierce loyalty. It was a day of golf, of laughter, of memories relived and friendships reaffirmed. And at the very end of it, in a moment of shocking, poetic, and profoundly heartbreaking symmetry, his life came to a gentle close. This is the incredible little-known story of the man whose heart was so full of joy from his homecoming that it simply stopped. This is the story of Dave Creighton and his last day with the Bruins. To truly appreciate Dave Creighton's life, you have to understand the world he inhabited as a professional. This was the National Hockey League of the 1940s, 50s, and early 60s, an era now mythologized as the original Six. The name itself is a slight misnomer, as other teams had come and gone, but for a solid quarter of a century, from 1942 until the Great Expansion of 1967, the entire league consisted of just 6 teams: the Montreal Canadiens, the Toronto Maple Leafs, the Chicago Blackhawks, the Detroit Red Wings, the New York Rangers, and the Boston Bruins. 6 teams. That's it. In a sport that was the lifeblood of an entire nation to the north, there were only about 120 jobs in the entire world at its highest level. Getting there was nearly impossible. Staying there was a daily battle. This wasn't the global, multi-billion-dollar entertainment enterprise we know today. This was a gritty, intimate, and often brutal league. The arenas, the Boston Garden, the Montreal Forum, Maple Leaf Gardens, were temples of the sport, known for their raucous, knowledgeable, and unforgiving crowds. The life of a player was a world away from modern pro athletes. They traveled between cities on overnight trains, playing cards and trying to sleep as the rails clacked beneath them. Salaries were so modest that almost every player had to work a second job in the off-season just to support their families. They were construction workers, farmers, brewery workers, or salesmen. They were blue-collar men playing a blue-collar game. And the game itself, it was a brutal ballet. For most of Dave Creighton's career, helmets were not just optional. They were seen by many as a sign of weakness. The padding was thin, made of leather and horsehair. The sticks were heavy wood, a far cry from today's composite technology. The style of play was punishing, built on relentless forechecking, bone-jarring body checks along the boards, and a code of conduct that was often enforced not by the referees, but by the players' own fists. To survive, let alone thrive, in this league, you needed more than just skill. You needed profound toughness, both physical and mental. You needed resilience, and you needed an unbreakable will. Dave Creighton, born in 1930 in the rugged, windswept hockey hotbed of Port Arthur, Ontario, was forged from the very elements required to succeed. Growing up on the north shore of Lake Superior, in a town that would later become part of Thunder Bay, he was one of thousands of Canadian boys whose life revolved around frozen ponds, and the dream of hearing their name announced over the radio on Hockey Night in Canada. Against all odds, he would make that dream a reality. Dave Creighton's path to the NHL was the classic Canadian story. He was a product of Port Arthur, a town that seemed to produce tough, no-nonsense hockey players the way other places produced lumber or grain. Life was hard, winters were long, and hockey was the town's passion and its primary export. From a young age, Creighton stood out, not necessarily as the most dazzlingly skilled player, but as one of the smartest and most determined. He honed his craft in the local leagues before making the jump to junior hockey, the primary feeder system for the NHL. It was there, playing against the best teenage players in the country, that he caught the eye of the Boston Bruins scouting staff. In the autumn of 1949, the dream became real. At just 19 years old, Dave Creighton was invited to the Boston Bruins training camp. He made the team. Walking into the dressing room of the old Boston Garden for the first time must have been an overwhelming experience. He was now sharing a locker room with his heroes, men who were living legends in Boston. This was the era of the famed Kraut line, center Milt Schmidt, and his wingers Woody Dumart and Bobby Bauer. They were icons, veterans who had led the Bruins for over a decade and were revered throughout the league. For a quiet rookie from Northern Ontario, it was like being cast in a movie alongside the biggest stars in the world. Creighton learned quickly. He wasn't a flashy end-to-end goal scorer. He understood his role. He was a cerebral, dependable, two-way center. He was the kind of player who could be trusted to kill a penalty, win a crucial face-off in his own zone, and make a smart pass to set up a line mate. In the hockey vernacular of the day, he was a digger, a hard worker who excelled in the corners and the dirty areas of the ice. In today's more analytical game, we'd praise his high hockey IQ. He was the kind of steady, reliable player that every winning team needs, the mortar that holds the bricks together. His hard work paid off. His breakout season came in 1952 to 53. Now, an established veteran, he was put at the center of a potent forward line, skating between the speedy Fleming Mackel and the rugged sniper Johnny Pearson. The trio clicked instantly. Creighton had a career year, scoring 20 goals and adding 24 assists for 44 points in 69 games. In a league where scoring was low, these numbers placed him firmly in the top 10 of all NHL players, ahead of many future Hall of Famers. That season, the Bruins caught fire. Led by Creighton's line and the veteran leadership of Milt Schmidt, they battled their way through the playoffs and reached the Stanley Cup final. Their opponent was the dynasty in the making, the mighty Montreal Canadiens, led by the legendary Maurice the Rocket Richard. The series was a hard-fought war. The Boston Garden was a cauldron of noise, and the Montreal Forum was enemy territory. The Bruins fought with everything they had, but the Canadiens' firepower was just too much. They lost the series in 5 games. It was the closest Dave Creighton would ever come to lifting hockey's holy grail. But in the iron-fisted world of the original 6, personal success and team loyalty were often rewarded with a one-way ticket out of town. The owners held all the power. Players were assets, pieces to be moved around a chessboard. They were bound by the infamous reserve clause, a section in every contract that tied a player to one team for his entire career, or until that team decided to trade, sell, or release him. There was no free agency. There was no choice. You went where they told you to go. And so, despite establishing himself as a key player in Boston, Dave began the nomadic life of a journeyman. After a brief but successful stint in the American Hockey League, the Bruins traded him to their most hated rivals, the Toronto Maple Leafs. From there, it was on to the Chicago Blackhawks, and then a final stop with the New York Rangers. For the better part of a decade, he crisscrossed the northeastern quadrant of the continent, a familiar face in a new uniform every few years. This life was a constant exercise in adaptation. It meant uprooting your wife and young family, finding a new home, and trying to quickly integrate into a new locker room with its own hierarchies and personalities. All the while, you lived with the gnawing uncertainty that the next phone call could send you packing once again. While superstars like Gordie Howe in Detroit and Jean Béliveau in Montreal became living monuments to their cities, players like Dave Creighton became symbols of something else entirely: professional perseverance and the quiet resilience of the working man athlete. His story wasn't just written in the NHL's grand arenas. Creighton also spent significant time in the American Hockey League, the top-tier minor league that was, at the time, filled with hardened veterans and hungry young prospects. It was here, away from the national spotlight, that he achieved one of his proudest accomplishments. In the 1955-56 season, while playing for the Providence Reds, the Boston Bruins' primary farm team, he was named player coach. He was responsible not only for his own performance on the ice, but for guiding the entire team. That year, he masterfully led the Reds all the way to a Calder Cup championship, the AHL's highest honor. It was a remarkable achievement, a testament to his intelligence, his leadership, and his unwavering dedication to the sport, proving he was a winner at any level he played. He continued his professional career until 1969, playing his final seasons in the minors, a respected veteran providing guidance to younger players. The game was changing. The original six had expanded, and a new generation was taking over. When he finally hung up his skates for good at the age of 39, he had played 615 games in the National Hockey League and nearly 500 more in the AHL. It was a long, hard, and deeply honorable career. But you don't just walk away from a life in hockey. It's in your blood. After his playing days were over, he transitioned seamlessly into a new role, a professional scout for the very team that had given him his start, the Boston Bruins. His life still revolved around cold arenas, but now he sat in the stands with a coffee in hand and a notepad on his knee. He traveled the back roads of North America, watching countless junior and college games, his eyes trained to spot the subtle tells of a future pro, the skating stride, the competitive fire, the hockey sense. He was searching for the next Dave Creighton, and in a beautiful twist of fate, he found him at his own dinner table. The Creighton hockey legacy was destined to continue. Dave's younger brother, Tom, had a brief taste of the NHL, but it was his son, Adam, born in 1965, who would carry the family name into a new era. Adam grew into a big skilled center, just like his dad. In 1983, the dream of another generation was realized when Adam Creighton was drafted into the NHL by the Buffalo Sabres. For Dave, a man who had poured his entire life into the sport, seeing his own son achieve the same dream must have been a moment of profound, indescribable pride. The torch had been passed. The true measure of a man like Dave Creighton isn't found in the cold, hard statistics of a hockey encyclopedia. It's found in the quiet respect of his peers, the enduring love of his family, and the dignity with which he carried himself. He was known as a gentleman, a quiet and thoughtful man in a world of loud personalities. He represented a generation of athletes who played for the love of the game, a love that was pure and uncomplicated. It is this deep, abiding love for the game and for the brotherhood it created that makes the story of his final day on Earth so incredibly poignant and powerful. The date was August 18th, 1987. The setting was the picturesque seaside town of Kennebunkport, Maine, a favorite summer spot for New Englanders. The occasion was the Boston Bruins' annual alumni reunion, a tradition that brought together players from across the decades for a golf tournament and an evening banquet. For the old-timers of the original Six era, this was a hallowed event. It was a chance to reconnect with the men who had been their road roommates, their line mates, their protectors, and sometimes their fiercest rivals in practice. Dave Creighton, of course, was there. At 57 years old, he remained fit and active, still possessing the strong frame of the athlete he had always been. The day was idyllic. He was surrounded by a who's who of Bruins history. There was Johnny Bucyk, the beloved chief, the team's longtime captain and leading scorer. There was his old coach and mentor, the legendary Milt Schmidt. Don Cherry, the famously colorful and outspoken coach and commentator, was also present. He and Dave had been teammates in the minors decades earlier. For Dave Creighton, this was more than just a reunion. It was a reaffirmation of his core identity. He had worn the sweaters of Toronto, Chicago, and New York, but in his heart, he was a Bruin. This was his original team. These were his people. This was home. After the golf tournament concluded, the alumni gathered for an evening banquet. It was a night of celebration, of honoring the past and savoring the present. Speeches were made, toasts were offered. Dave was in his element, moving from table to table, sharing a handshake, a story, a laugh. He had spent an entire day completely immersed in the very best memories of his life, surrounded by the men who understood his journey better than anyone else in the world. As the evening wound down, the men began to disperse. They said their goodbyes with promises to see each other again next year, same time, same place. Dave Creighton returned to his hotel room, and there, sometime during the night, peacefully and without any warning, his heart gave out. He passed away in his sleep just hours after leaving the warmth and laughter of the celebration. The news the following morning sent a wave of shock and grief through the Bruins community. The man they had just shared a meal with, the man they had laughed with on the 18th green, was gone. It was a tragic, stunning loss. But as the initial shock began to subside, many of his old friends and teammates began to see the incredible, heartbreaking poetry in the circumstances of his death. The life of a journeyman athlete like Dave Creighton doesn't typically invite controversy or heated debate. He was, by all accounts, a consummate professional and a gentleman, but his career, and the careers of all players from his generation, took place against a backdrop of fundamental issues that continue to resonate in professional sports today. The most significant of these was the stark imbalance of power between players and owners. The reserve clause, a standard feature in every player's contract, effectively made them the property of their team. Dave Creighton couldn't choose to remain a Boston Bruin, even after his career-best season. He couldn't test the open market to see what another team might be willing to pay for his services. His fate, and the fate of his family, was decided in a back room by men who saw him as a movable asset on a balance sheet. His career path, Boston to Toronto to Chicago to New York, was a map drawn by others. This complete lack of agency was the central, unbreachable conflict for every player of his generation. They were masters of their craft on the ice, but powerless to control their own destiny off it. Then there was the immense physical toll of the game itself. The original Six era is often romanticized for its toughness, but that toughness came at a staggering price. Playing without a helmet, with primitive equipment, and with a style of hockey that not only tolerated but often glorified fighting, meant that injuries were a constant companion. Careers were ended by a single, awkward fall into the boards. The long-term consequences of concussions and repeated subconcussive hits were completely unknown and unstudied. Today, we are acutely aware of the devastating neurological conditions that have afflicted many athletes from that era. For players like Dave, these were just the accepted risks of the job, the price you paid to play the game you loved. His story compels us to look at the good old days with a more nuanced perspective, acknowledging the deep human cost that was rarely, if ever, discussed at the time. Finally, Creighton's quiet, persistent career makes us consider a more philosophical question. How do we define a successful life in sports? Is it only the superstars, the transcendent talents who rewrite the record books, who truly matter? Or is there a different, perhaps more profound kind of greatness to be found in the journeyman? In the man who, despite being traded, despite being demoted, despite the endless travel and uncertainty, continues to show up, work hard, and contribute for nearly 2 decades? Dave Creighton's story champions the quiet dignity of the grinder, the professional who forms the essential, often unseen foundation upon which all great teams are built. His life reminds us that for every household name like Bobby Orr or Wayne Gretzky, there are hundreds of Dave Creightons, men who dedicated their entire adult lives to the sport, who formed the very backbone of their teams, and whose contributions, while less celebrated, were no less vital to the fabric of the game. And his death. His death serves as the most powerful and poignant testament to the human side of professional sports. It underscores the profound, lifelong connection that players feel to their teams and, more importantly, to each other. The Boston Bruins Alumni Association wasn't just a name on a letterhead for him. It was his tribe. It was his family. His passing at that specific time and in that specific place transformed him from a respected former player into a legend of a different kind, a symbol of ultimate belonging, of finding your way home at the very end. But perhaps the most beautiful and resonant part of his legacy is that it didn't truly end in that hotel room in 1987. It continued out on the ice, carried on by the next generation. His son, Adam, went on to have a long and successful NHL career of his own, playing over 700 games. And in a touch of perfect storybook fate, for a portion of his career, Adam Creighton played for the Boston Bruins. When Adam pulled that iconic black and gold sweater with the spoked B over his head, he wasn't just playing for himself. He was carrying his father's story with him. The Creighton name was once again skating on the ice of the Boston Garden. The circle, in the most beautiful way imaginable, was now complete. There is a profound and undeniable sadness in a life that ends too soon. But in the unique and remarkable story of Dave Creighton's final day, there is also a strange and beautiful comfort. He didn't die alone, or forgotten, or in misery. He died on a day that was, by all accounts, a perfect one. A day filled with joy, surrounded by the warmth of his oldest friends, completely immersed in the world that had given his life its greatest and most lasting meaning. His heart, which had beat strong and steady for 57 years, through hundreds of grueling hockey games, through trades and emotions, through victories and defeats, finally gave out on a day when it was full of memories, full of laughter, and full of the indomitable spirit of camaraderie that had defined his entire life. It is a tragic ending, but it is also, in its own heartbreaking way, a perfect one,